Hi, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for the whole team who helped out. And thank you for our wonderful panelists and moderators. We're grateful too, tremendously grateful to Target Open House. And we have 3 exciting panels tonight. We've got Wearable and 3D for our first one. For our second one, Privacy and Security. And the third is Artificial Intelligence. And we've got just a stellar lineup of panelists, so I'm super excited to have you hear this. And again, thanks so much for everyone who came out. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Owen. I'm Janet Beach. I run a marketing company that's focused on product launches and branding. And I think I'm moderating this panel because I used to be the head of marketing at Levi's and then went into the consulting business around branding and startups in technology. So I often work on tech brands. So I'm really excited to introduce our panel to you. We're going to start off with Dr. Raj Bhatka. He's an inventor and an entrepreneur. He's the CEO and co-founder of Function, which has a platform technology that is amazing. It can print on multiple materials like polymers, leather, ceramics, and it can turn these things into knits, wovens, leathers, and non-wovens at high throughput with a low cost and energy efficiency as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say, and he knows a lot about 3D. Next we have Crystal Mackenzie, and she's a brand marketer. She's had more than a decade of marketing, and she has experience in a lot of different industries which are fascinating, including the gaming industry. She worked on the headphones from Dr. Dre. She's now at Bose, and she's worked in entertainment with Warner Brothers and in cosmetics at Kendo. She was formerly with LVMH, the luxury goods company, and she's currently running marketing and partnerships at Bose, and they have an emerging wearable group, and I saw her product earlier tonight, which I hope she's going to show us later. They're classic sunglasses with built-in Bose speakers, totally amazing for a complete immersive experience. And then last but not least, we have Al Linke, and he's the IT director and creator of a wonderful product called Cat Clutch. It's a smartphone-controlled LED fashion handbag for women. And here's a fun fact. Al was a cast member on the reality shows America's Greatest Makers and the elevator, the entrepreneur's elevator pitch. In his day job, he runs or is a senior director for IT at a Fortune 500 company, and he has a portfolio of 30 products that he manages at a $10 billion semiconductor startup. He says he's really learned so much from being a maker and an entrepreneur, and so he's going to answer a number of questions about this whole space tonight, but also give us the benefit of his lessons learned. So let's jump right into the first question, and let's talk about really who is the customer for wearable technology. Raj, who do you think are the primary target audience for wearable tech fashion?
Yeah, so it depends on the use case with wearables. Wearables is an umbrella term for anything that comes onto your body, including clothing, like the Bose sunglasses, hearables, right, which is trending now, is the next wave, and then wrist-worn devices, of course, and chest straps. Where I'm coming from is more the clothing side. This could be underwear, briefs, boxer briefs, t-shirts, compression garments. So that's where we see most of the traction. Now, is the market there for consumers? I think it's too early. probably 10 years off. There's a lot of other infrastructural things that need to happen in terms of our lifestyle changes and insurance companies getting on board and all those different things. So the target demographic right now is a very elite athlete type, peak performance type people. They're willing to try it, but the stickiness and engagement isn't quite there. So the real use case is solving a business problem, which is more in like nursing homes and such, military that actually needs it. There's a real value proposition. So long story short, that's
Great.
it.
Crystal, what do you think about that? What are some of the primary target audiences you have in your headlights?
So with our product, we, to your point, wearable technology can be highly inaccessible. And so we were really focused on minimizing the amount of tech that we put into the glasses, not just in terms of how it looked, but ultimately how it performed, to provide one clear value to the consumer. By doing this, we were able to tell a more dialed down story, but also make it more accessibly priced. So we wanted to make sure that we were pricing it at a point that wasn't completely out of reach and that was about competitive with comparable products. So for us, we were looking actually not necessarily at a tech audience, but more of an audience that was paying $200 for sunglasses, that cared about their style, cared about the way they looked, but was looking for something extra from it, that, you know, wanted to keep their AirPods at home, or, you know, wanted to be able to show off a new piece of tech to their friends and family.
No wires, in other words.
Exactly. So for us, it was about really trying to get that accessibility and trying to grow install base, because a lot of it has been about testing tech. For us, it was establishing an overall consumer.
Okay, great. And let's skip to another question now, and I'll start with you, Al. Let's talk about products that will last versus fads. What do you think are some of the wearables that you think are examples of what might endure?
Yeah, so I think that's the $10,000 question. So,
Of course.
and I'll put myself in the category of one-hit wonder. So I think the thing that I learned was it can't just look good. I think the feedback we got on this, which is a light-up handbag, I'll talk more about it, but looks good, but what other problem does it solve for you, right? Because your normal handbag, you don't have a battery, you don't have to charge it, so that's extra work that I'm making the user do. But what other functionality am I giving them that solves a problem in their life? So I don't really have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
I didn't solve that problem, but I think that's the challenge.
Raj, what is your point of view about that? What are you thinking in terms of how to generate that stickiness?
So I think it's happening. You see these telltale signs. If you look at Fitbit, they have a premium service, and that's connected to health insurance. So if you have a real business problem on the patient side, or you have some ROI from health insurance, the person, now everybody's getting more aware of sleep. So that's where the conversation is starting, but I'm actually not too sure where that stickiness will come from on a long enough time scale. I think there's telltale signs of it's coming.
Great, okay. And what's your advice to those makers, inventors, entrepreneurs who want to develop a wearable apparel, wearable tech apparel or fashion? Let's start with you, Al, since you did it here on this bag.
Sure, I think I highly recommend crowdfunding. It's a great way to validate the customer demand for your product. That's what I did for this. And I think it also depends on your goal. So if your goal is to be, again, not to overuse the word one-hit wonder, and just do a Kickstarter and get it out there and get some customers and be done with it, easily done. I think if your goal is to turn it into a sustainable business and actually post crowdfunding, turn it into a real business with stickiness, then you really need to think about your strategy and partnering with a real brand. Because I think you'll find as an independent maker, it's very difficult to do it on your own. That was my learning.
Okay. And Crystal, I bet you have some ideas on this.
Hardware's hard, so Godspeed to you if that's what you want to do. That's my first piece of advice. Is you're a tough cookie for wanting to do hardware. Fabric sounds probably better, all things considered. But my advice to you is to find one thing and do it very well. So don't try to overcomplicate in terms of your development, in terms of your ID, in terms of everything. I think we get a little bit caught up, particularly being in the Valley and sort of having the ghost of Steve Jobs loom all over us, that we need everything to work perfectly. We need it to look perfect, and we need to have a perfect app that goes with it, and it needs to have perfect, electronics that have a really long battery life, and it has to do all these things, and that's insane for one person. Find one thing you do really well, perfect it, and then figure out how you can continue to build on that. Like MVP. Don't ship it like software. Don't think you can iterate it, but think about it the way that they think about developing software is let's develop the most important feature. Let's get that shipped. Let's get that in a good place, and then let's move on.
And Crystal, I think you told me something fascinating when we were first chatting on the phone about this panel, in which you said you had observed that sometimes doing something simpler was the way to go. Could you elaborate, or could you explain that or restate it properly? I probably didn't give you the right service.
Yeah, so for us, there is, back to the stickiness question, the wearable that wins is going to be the wearable that's the most fun, and the wearable that's the easiest to use, because you have the whole tool to toy or toy to tool cycle. It's like what smartphones were. The real crux of smartphones wasn't that it got email. The crux of smartphones was when Farmville launched and the Facebook app launched and all of that, because all of a sudden you didn't want to put it down because it was your source of fun, and then it became your source of fuel. It's the same thing. Going for something that's simple and fun and is an easy story is a way to get somebody using it regularly, because it doesn't feel like a chore. It doesn't feel like a chore to learn. It doesn't feel like a chore to use. It's something that they want to use because it's fun, and that's what we really looked at for this. And I think whoever can corner fun and get install base with fun and then continue to iterate on that is ultimately going to win this game.
And so they can then add the complexity. Okay, and Raj, let's talk about innovations that will turn out to be really important to the fashion industry. And maybe you could quickly share with us how, in a nutshell, does this 3D printing work, and why is it going to be so important to the fashion industry, do you think?
Yeah, so it's an umbrella term, but the thing about inkjet printing, everybody had an inkjet printer at home. You press print, different colors come out on paper. So think about, instead of paper, you have fabric. And instead of colors, you have different functionalities. So you're printing metals, you're printing for circuitry, you're printing sensors. So all this can be encompassed on fabrics or leather. Now, what is the use case? That's something we're still figuring out, where that use case would be. Now, from a technology standpoint, that's what you first need to kind of scale to the textile industry standards, because the textile industry is all about high unit volume, low margin. So it's so difficult to, first of all, make something work and then get margin enough on it to build a business. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem. The market doesn't exist quite, and the technology still needs to be worked out. So we're still exploring, but that's kind of how our core tech works. And you already see this happening with digital printing of customized inkjet printing of apparel. So
what's a great example of a product that we might see that is using this technology?
I would say health monitoring would be one, specifically tailored for a target demographic of military or elderly. So both of those demographics have similar needs. So of health monitoring and performance monitoring, as well as passive user experience. So something that just works all the time. So that's where we see a little bit of the market actually pulling. Mm-hmm. So
great.
Yeah.
So there are lots of new kinds of technologies being used in clothing, aren't there? I mean, have all of you heard of a hot vest? I was looking at one for my husband for Christmas. And then there are the sensors that can be in the inserts for your foot, for your shoes, that have various ways of monitoring heat and reducing falling risk and so forth. There's all sorts of exciting innovations out there. What have you guys heard of that you sort of think is intriguing? Have you heard of any things that this group might like to know about, just as you are working in this industry? Any interesting innovations or applications? Have you run into any, Al?
I think e-ink has a lot of potential. E-ink, so if anyone has an Amazon Kindle, no power, you can wirelessly set the display, it's flexible. I think there's been a few bracelets that I've seen with e-ink, but I think that's got a lot of potential that hasn't really been tapped into. And they do color now as well.
What about Crystal? What do you think?
I think that there's a lot of low-frequency signal technology that's really interesting, that essentially allows us to stream an audio signal into places that you normally wouldn't be able to stream an audio signal into, because all of our audio is now streaming. So if you think about even something like swimming in a pool, or just being in water, you can't stream audio into that, and that is very limiting. And with some of just our new very basic bouncing technology, we're able to get in there and literally talk to people underwater and talk to people through materials that we never thought we would. And audio is so readily available. It's not as prohibitive as visual. I'm really excited about that.
I'll actually go off of Crystal's point as well. The first wave of wearables was more wrist-worn devices, and the second wave is more hearables, because you have this infrastructure of podcasts, audiobooks, music, basically proliferating every aspect of our lives. The third wave will come, which is going to be some sort of smart clothing, but it's kind of early for that. So I see more problems being solved through like hearables right now. And people are putting sensors as well, so from a health monitoring standpoint.
Yeah, so that's a great learning for us all to take away, these wristables, hearables, and then comes the apparel. Great. Wonderful. Well, that's kind of an easy thing to remember. All of you can be really smart. Now let's talk about what some of the real challenges are. We'll talk with these experts who know a bit about this, some of the challenges. When you are getting into the intersection of tech with fashion, they have very different seasonalities in their brand development and product launches, don't they? It's not just a licensing arrangement, is it? So maybe, Crystal, would you mind talking about the seasonality of fashion versus that of the tech industry? And then maybe, Al, you'll jump in after Crystal.
Yeah, so the first thing our consumers requested when we showed them this product and we were doing testing was co-brand it with a sunglass brand, because Bose isn't a sunglass brand, and we think Bose has permission to be on this, but there's some cognitive dissonance here. And so we listened to our consumers and we talked to every sunglass brand you can think of, quite literally every sunglass brand you can think of. And this is particularly difficult in the space because most sunglass brands are owned by Luxottica and they're vertically integrated conglomerate. And what we found was the big tension point is they have quick seasons. Most have 2 to 4 seasons. They have fast turnaround times. They have anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months from conception to getting a product out. And their minimum run quantities are incredibly small. You're talking about 100 units to maybe 5,000 units. For us, the fact that we got this product out in 18 months, or in 14 months, was a small miracle at Bose. Most things take 18 months to 3 years. Our minimum order quantities are around 500,000 in order for us to be profitable. Our tooling costs are upwards of 10 million. It just gets really, really complicated. And then just the sheer number of people we can have working on here. Then you add one more layer of complexity, which is margin. So to Raja's point, we're low margin. That's just part of being in tech. Luckily, we're an accessory, so we're higher margin than like TVs, but we're fairly low margin. Where, my past life in beauty and fashion, we were looking at massive margin points. And so there's an expectation there. And that's why when you've seen tech products that have actually been developed inside a fashion company, like the Oakley Radar Pace, the price for them is astronomical because they're still expecting their fashion sort of margin. So after looking into it, we felt that there was a better opportunity for us to establish Bose as a sunglass brand in the way that Apple has now established themselves as a watch brand versus trying to find a fashion brand to partner with.
Great. Al, what do you think on this?
Yeah, so I think very similar to Crystal. So as part of this project, so we reached out to pretty much every major handbag manufacturer that you can think of. 2 of them returned my call. And which actually was pretty good. I was pretty surprised. That was not bad. Because I don't have any contacts. I'm just some guy working out of his basement, literally. So 2 issues. One was the first one we talked to. So she was like, yeah, I think I can sell this. We can partner. We can do a $1,000 bag. So I'm thinking, great. $1,000, that sounds good. What's my cut? She's like, well, we have a lot of middlemen and markups. So her cost to make the bag was $150. She's like, you need to be $20. And I want to start with 100. So again, minimum quantity. So that was just, business model didn't make sense for either side. And I think the other thing was just logistics. So even if we got past the business model, the next thing was like, hey, my supply chain is in Italy. I have all these leather shops. They're not going to know what to do with your LEDs and batteries. What if there's a problem? Are you going to fly to Italy and take care of it? So not problems that can't be solved, but need to be committed and conviction to overcome this barrier. So that I found those were the 2 kind of big ones. And I think there wasn't a brand willing to kind of take that next leap and really commit to it.
So what you're talking about is there are a lot of lessons to be learned on both sides, and these are different industries trying to work together, and you have to be the steward and advocate of all of this, is what you're telling us. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Raj, you're looking like you want to add in on that.
went through the same phase the last 6 months to talk to a lot of big brands, like the Nikes of the world, the Gaps, all that. When you have a new technology, new innovation, to Crystal's point and Al's point, they're not going to be able to have the infrastructure to take it to the next level, to the market. So you have to de-risk it. So it's chicken and the egg problem. I always go back to that because, of course, they're not going to invest because that's not part of their culture either. Because fashion companies are fashion and tech is tech, different product cycles, different supply chains. So we basically face this problem of like, we have to go prove a use case ourselves, validate the technology, and then maybe if we are successful, then they can come on as a co-licensing, co-branding type of project. But,
so that you'll do the work.
Exactly, we got to do the work and look at the margins, how much margins we get, and do all that.
And I have one little other thing to add. There isn't a lot of there's zero cross-pollination across tech and fashion. Like, I'm a weird unicorn that I've worked for LVMH, and I've also worked for PlayStation. Like, people like that like doesn't exist, and people look at my resume all the time and think like it's a mistake. And so what you see is, as you've seen like in the finance industry, when you saw like the collapse of 2008 and 2009, a lot of those people were seeking gold and they came out west and they came to tech companies and they brought their finance knowledge, and all of a sudden it's not a coincidence that 2 to 5 years later we have an influx of tech startups. We have LearnVest, and we have like all of these various Lending Club and things like that. The same thing across everything, across transportation, across hospitality. Again, as hospitality is starting to go down, they start to come out here to tech, and they get jobs at Airbnb, and then they go off and they start things like Lyric. So there's lots of cross-pollination that's happening, and so they're more understanding of the two business models and how to make them work. There's no cross-pollination across tech and beauty and fashion, and so when they meet, it's like it's like apples and steak meeting, and they have no idea how to integrate because nobody on either side of the coin knows how to talk to the other side. And so until the two sides open up their doors to either industry, it's going to continue to be that way.
Great. So given that, let's start asking Raj, when do you really think smart clothing is going to truly take off, and what do you think is going to drive the growth?
Yeah, so I started studying this market when I started my PhD, so it's been 3 years only. But I tried out every single use case for smart clothing, and it's good. We didn't burn anyone into any investor money because it's all a market study while doing the PhD. So this year I was like, okay, this is going to take a lot of work. So when you start a company, you will then understand the supply chain and all the risks that you have to take to get even a small product to market. So I say 10 years, mainly because what needs to happen in wearables today is things will start going to subscription, and then it'll be tied in with your health insurance. So those are going to be macro drivers that are then going to have impact on the need for smart clothing, because clothing that's on your body is going to be way more accurate than Fitbits. It's just a physics thing, the fundamental electronics. So that's where I see it. But it's going to be more like 10 years, I would say. Like mass market, consumers buying it.
Well, as long as you've brought that up, I'm going to jump to the notion of the fitness, because that was part of what we were to cover in our topics here tonight. And there's a lot of excitement around wearable tech and the potential to contribute to fitness, but it hasn't really grown at the rapid pace that it was expected to, has it? And my understanding is that there's a lot of reasons for that, like accuracy of the sensors, how to make sure that the patient, so-called, in the healthcare application or in the fitness application, puts it on correctly so that it can actually measure and know what's going on. But as you say, one of the drivers might be insurance, and also the fact that the healthcare industry wants to lower costs and maybe do things that prevent readmission to hospitals and do remote patient care. Do any of you have any other kinds of thoughts about how this all relates to the fitness market? You might have studied it the most, Raj, actually.
So I have a couple of things to add about the fitness market. So there is a small, I guess, tens of millions of dollar market. It's not a $100 million market of smart clothing for athletes. But it's a better version of a chest strap, if that makes sense. So there isn't that long-term engagement because you're getting similar data. As a consumer myself, I have a Fitbit because it does the job for me. I could buy an Apple Watch, but but I don't need it. I could also buy another wearable, but I don't need it. So there's just some of the problems, like consumers themselves are not at that point where we need 100% accuracy. Who needs it? It's cardiologists, health insurance companies, patients, chronic heart patients.
Chronic
Patients need it because it's a life or death situation. It's a lifestyle situation. So, and the insurance company will get on board as long as the reimbursement codes are there. So that's where I see a little bit more of real use case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, now I thought it would be fun if we asked our panelists to do a little show and tell of their products. So Al, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your app-controlled LED handbag?
Great, yeah. So light up handbag, and the main feature is you can change the design for your phone. So you guys want to try that out? Just pick one of those.
How cool is this?
There you go.
There we go.
So I actually created this to solve my own personal problem. My own personal problem was my wife buys a lot of handbags, very expensive. And so I thought if I could make her this, she would buy less bags, I'd save myself some money. So it didn't work, it was a big fail. But when she would take it out to, this is more of an evening bag, it's got enough room for lipstick, wallet, phone, built-in phone charger. She would take it out to events, and people would come up to her. It was like this big conversation starter, and I was like, okay, maybe there's something there. So we did a crowdfunding, did a Kickstarter. We ended up shipping 200 units. And I was asked to talk a little bit about lessons learned. In the tech world, which is where I come from, 200 is nothing, right? You can't even get a manufacturer to talk to you for 200 units. I'm just lucky because I had some friends in Shenzhen that did me a favor. But it's very difficult, and even in that run, your production costs are going to be quite high. So for me to sell this was $450, which is a lot, right? That puts me into the luxury market. So now I'm competing with Prada and Gucci, and I'm not a brand. So that was a pretty quick learning that playing in that space, not being a brand, is probably not going to last too long. So that's kind of where it stopped, and we're sort of looking for brands that are willing to partner with us. That's my story.
Wonderful, thank you. And Raj, tell us about one of the most exciting and beneficial aspects of your textile approach.
Yeah, so the big thing, when I first started my PhD, I looked at the market, I talked to over 100 people in our value chain, and the biggest problem was scale, of course, because the textile industry operates under high unit volume, low margin business models. So in order for smart textiles or textile electronic type products to come out, you had to operate under the same regime. So I went after automation as a focus of my PhD development. In that, I saw things happening in the textile industry from inkjet printing. People were printing custom garments in the fashion sector, and then inkjet printing is also being used for TVs, OLEDs right now, and flexible phones such as the Samsung foldable phone. So there's a lot of resonance there from a tech standpoint and manufacturing standpoint. So it took some of those ideas, not the same thing, but took some of those ideas of printing, which is established, but using it for functionality. So like circuits, sensors, and even let's say color changing at one point, maybe in the next 5-10 years, when that technology is mature. But it's more of a robust platform. Now the question, of course, for every startup is where do we start? Coming as a technologist, so that's one thing when you're pushing a technology, we're kind of quickly realizing. But that's our platform. That can enable, so automation basically.
Great. So Crystal, will you rock those sunglasses for us, please, and tell us the story?
So these are the Bose frames. This is the Alto style. As cool as they look on me, I will happily pass them around to anybody. Do you want to try them? Go ahead and try them on. Here you go. So the concept behind the Bose frames is, we're an audio company, right? And we need to find ways to give people audio that are new and that are innovative, but aren't ultimately taking you away from buying another pair of headphones. And so Bose is a super cool company. It's privately held. Dr. Bose was very academic. When he retired, he donated the majority earning shares to MIT. So it's very research driven, and they brought on a couple of guys to basically do a startup within Bose, and they were going through the R&D department, and they found this technology called Sippy Cup. And Sippy Cup, if a Sippy Cup is a cup that when you dump it over, water doesn't come out, Sippy Cup audio is when you listen to it the audio doesn't spill. So right now they're listening to the audio and you can't really hear it, right? Next door. She can't hear it, he can hear it. So it was like, this is really cool. And they had it attached to this silver headband. It's very dorky looking. And we said, what if you put those inside sunglasses? And I swear to God, the engineer looked us dead in the eye and said, wouldn't that look dorky? And I was like, Jason, what you're wearing right now is so dorky.
So dorky that we've covered.
So the whole idea with it was we wanted to create a personal listening experience that didn't replace a pair of headphones, that was comfortable, but that was in a familiar form factor. We didn't want to throw another form factor out there where we had to get some sort of understanding of what the form factor could do, right? So we've seen this. Yeah. Do you got it? Can you hear it? There you go. So the great things about sunglasses is everybody's worn a pair of sunglasses, everybody knows what they are, and so it's a really familiar way to deliver this type of audio, which was great, and they've been wildly successful. They've way exceeded expectations and are the fastest growing product of Bose's history.
How exciting. Great. So while you're all trying on the sunglasses, would you like to pass your purse as well? Sure. Just let people look at it. I'm interested in the question next on, and Raj, I'll start with you and then go to Crystal. What do you think are the well-known companies that we're going to see become the big players in wearable tech, apparel, or fashion? What can we expect?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be a bigger company that comes out with it. It's going to have to be a small startup that de-risks it first, because there's a lot of infrastructural changes. It's a little different than making a hardware consumer product where the supply chain, like a Jabil or Flextronics, can come in to scale. This, like, the whole industry hasn't been made, so I would say small startup comes out, de-risks it, let's say from 0 to 1,000, and then from 1,000 to 10,000 to 1 million, that company can come in, invest, scale, and then ship it out. I would say, from what I've seen, is Nike, Lululemon, Under Armour as more of like and then Adidas as well, as more of like sort of looking at this space of like smart clothing. Adidas bought a company called Textronics like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But at that time, when they were actually trying to compete with Fitbit, and that company just, it wasn't the right time, market timing.
I think my old alma mater, Levi Strauss, did a trucker jacket as well that had everything in it for commuting on your bike. You know?
Right.
So, yeah.
So the other thing to that point I'll add is I think Apple or Google or a bigger tech company may come in as well to scale.
Yep.
Just kind of like Bose, going in, because you recognize the opportunity to diversify and go into a multi-trillion-dollar market, so to speak, as hype as that sounds. But that's exactly what these companies are able to do.
So that's what you expect. Okay, yeah. Crystal, what do you expect? Who might be the well-known players?
I think it's up for anybody's grab. Apple obviously, but I think people have a lot of expectations for Google, and I don't think it's going to be Google. It could be Amazon, but they're not investing in their tech. They're investing in just trying to get Alexa into things. But ultimately, I think a big question mark here is going to be privacy, because the more integrated we get with wearables, the more data they're collecting, and the more data people are collecting, the more it freaks them out, and it really should. And so I actually think there's an opportunity for a more archaic, and I'm not just saying this because I'm at Bose, but I am saying because I'm at Bose, but we're a 54-year-old company out of Framingham, Massachusetts, doesn't scream innovation, but we're able to come in because our intentions are pure. Then we still want to make money, but we're not trying to buy ads and they sell you ads and things like that, or take that kind of information. And so I think it has an opportunity to be a company that has the resources but isn't looking to sell data, and there's only a few of those left, and so that's really where the white space is, I think.
I think we're getting towards the end of our time, so I want to skip to let each of you tell us, sort of as a closing thing before we open it up for questions, what do you think are some of the most important lessons learned? What have you observed, or what have you actually learned? And if you've mentioned something before, you can add to it or go on to some other lessons, because I suspect that some of you in the audience will find that to be the most valuable part, the lessons learned. And let's start with you, if we could, Al.
Yeah, so I think like any product, don't skip the customer validation step. I think a good rule of thumb is interview 100 customers before you develop any code or finalize your design, which is what we did for that. Which got a lot of good feedback.
That's a great lesson. Crystal,
Do one thing really well.
don't overcomplicate.
Don't overcomplicate it. Do one thing really, really well and stick to that one thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with those 2 points. And then the other thing I would add is like a simple use case that solves a real problem. Either it makes money for somebody or it saves lives or something like of that sort. And you got to learn that the hard way. Like I've been studying it for a while, and it doesn't make sense to you. It's academic when I hear it or read it, but it makes sense when you're doing it day to day. And so that's what I've learned. Yeah.
Well, and you told me when we first met, make it a win for the planet as well as some kind of a solution with a real benefit. And I thought that was a very strong point that you made. So we have a few minutes for questions, and I'd love it if you'd have some for our experts here tonight. They're really eager to share their knowledge, and don't be shy and ask it in your most direct fashion.
Hi, I'm Ray. I'm business development for tech startups. And I'm curious, a question for Al. Doing a crowdfunding campaign, is there any guarantee that people won't steal your idea?
There's not. So a lot of people used to ask me, should you do a patent, right? And patent's expensive, especially if you're an independent person. So, there's a risk, but if you have a good product and you're able to get out fast enough, you're going to be okay.
Was that a consideration or a concern of yours before launching?
It was, but what can you do? So, for example, after this came out, there was a toy company that had a very similar version. I actually bought one and actually used this almost the same electronics that I used. But, it's going to happen, right? I don't think you can avoid it. You just have to have a good product and have loyal customers.
Have you thought about other ways or have explored other ways like leveraging influencers to share the bag or?
Yeah, we did a little bit of that. Yeah,
As well.
that was helpful. Yeah, but what I will say in terms of marketing, that was another lesson learned is I think there's this fallacy that if you have this big social media following or you get all this press that somehow those are going to lead to big sales. So, we did 2 reality shows, we did a bunch of press, none of that really led to anything. And the one blog post that actually generated the most sales was an article on Architectural Digest. And I was really surprised. They reached out, I was like, who are these guys, Architectural Digest? Okay, here's my media kit, go whatever. Next day, I sold 7 bags, $450 each, right? And it's because that demographic is into high-end design, $450, it's kind of more in my price range. And so go where your target audience is. That's what I learned. Yeah.
Maybe they were thinking of more space in the closet, too, like you said.
Worked out.
Okay, do we have another question?
Hi, this is Mayank. I run an image processing platform for e-commerce companies. Crystal, I have a question for you. You mentioned that for a wearable product to be successful, it needs to be fun, first of all. What are some up-and-coming use cases that you see that you think are making that are exciting and which are like fun use cases, which you think will make the wearable product successful?
Fun. Oh, so I actually just saw one. This is just off the top of my head because I just saw it. But it's this underwater bone conduction headset that was developed so coaches could communicate with triathletes in the water while they're coaching. And it was basically developed initially because they wanted to have like a soul cycle for swimming, and it was really, really fun. But what they're finding is they can actually like communicate with like up to 50 Navy SEALs at the same time in training underwater, and it's awesome. So they're really able to get this kind of fun, like, oh, I'm working out, I'm communicating, like friends, like talking crap to one another while they're in the pool, and then it sort of started to expand and take off.
Who else has a question? Great questions, guys.
Hi, my name is Danielle. I have a question actually for Crystal. I was wondering if you could shed some light on your experience from PlayStation to LVMH or vice versa.
Yeah, so super weird. So I started my career at Monster Cable right when they launched Beats by Dre. And so I launched Beats by Dre, and I was there in the beginning for the first 30 years. There's lots of tabloid pictures of me and Dre together, which are very funny. And then I went to PlayStation to launch PlayStation Vita and then run PS3 and PS4, and it burnt me out. I loved gaming and I loved tech, but it was super hard to be a woman, particularly a young woman that wasn't unattractive, and it really weighed really heavily on my soul. And I got a really great job in entertainment and found out entertainment was no different than tech, and I wanted to just go where everybody looked like me, so I didn't really have to put up with that stuff. And I was lucky enough to get into LVMH when they were looking for somebody who had worked in entertainment, because Kat Von D was my first brand, and so they wanted someone who understood TV and movies, and I was just coming off Warner Brothers. And what I found was, while I loved being around like a bunch of girls, it was literally like being in a sorority house. I missed tech. I genuinely missed tech, and I remember calling my mom and being like, I miss talking to engineers, and I miss supercomputing and everything that I had before. And she's like, well, don't let the boys scare you away. Like, go find a place where where you can stand up for yourself, and also where the boys aren't jerks. And I found that in Bose. I'm very lucky that I found that in Bose. Bose is a very benevolent company, very, very cool. That's part of being private. They're just very chill. But ultimately, that was what drove me. It's not like a very great, I love all of my experience, and I've loved all the places I've worked, but that's ultimately what drove me there, and then what drove me back. And at the end of all of it, I do have to say, like, we have to open up to people who don't look like us and who don't have the same experiences as us, because what I've been able to bring to Frames is like the marketing and things like that I have, Bose has never really seen before, and it's only because I worked in fashion.
Well, that's a great point about diversity, and it builds on the whole idea of the technology meeting the apparel and fashion brands, for example. Very good. Do we have any other questions? Does anybody want to tell us what you're doing out there in the audience? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Mauro Brile-Zanetti. I currently work as a chief evangelist for a tech company, and mostly we serve fashion, luxury, big brands all over the world. We do location services, so basically we collect data. And we do this under the GDPR, which is the most restricted regulation designed in Europe that now is, going all over the world. California is at the very forefront, And so the three of you are discussing, by the way, on a very different level, because I guess Bose, for example, has retail, while you are designing for the future, okay, and you two with the fashion. So, but the thing in common for me is the fact that maybe you should focus on the community, not on your product, but the real boss, who is actually the customer. So if you start designing the customer, you mean the needs and desires, maybe you can nail something. Otherwise, you'll be, I know Luxottica very close, I'm Italian. I come from the fashion, and trust me, it's true, they are so old, the fashion industry, and so I want to give you this little, start, not to focus on the product, but how technology, simple things, can help an old industry.
Great advice. I think in every sector. Of course, I say that as a marketing and branding person. I would say that, but thank you. Okay, any other questions? Oh yes, please come forward. And tell us your name.
My name's Dave. I've done a bunch of technology stuff for a long time. But I wanted to ask you guys, because you kind of mentioned it earlier a little bit, so how much of adoption for wearables is going to be driven through the sports market? So you've got like high-end skiing and professional bicycling, where technology is now integrated into clothing and glasses and other things, headsets. Is that going to be sort of, because the reason that normal people like me have a carbon fiber bike is because there's a whole tier of racers who tell us that that's sort of what we need to have, and that gets filtered down through the retail channels, and that's so guys like me who really doesn't need a carbon fiber bike. I have a carbon fiber bike, and I do appreciate it. So I guess I just want to ask, like, how much of that sort of logic is going to drive wearables?
Yeah, so I would say it comes back to the price point, the margin, and like how much do you need it, right? So if you're talking about the target demographic you were talking about, so we looked at that one, like, you know, weekend warriors / bicyclists / marathoners. So these are more like, you know, the different types of athletes, but they're still in that umbrella of elite athletes, peak performers. Now, the price points that they're able to pay just won't cut it to scale our technology to get to the point where it's actually valuable and there's a business around it, a business proposition. So that's why for smart clothing wearable, it's very difficult. Where is that going to come in terms of timeline? Today you have chest straps. So a lot of the target demographic is using chest straps. Now, if you can make the form factor of chest straps and the accuracy of the chest strap, but in the form factor of sort of, let's say, a boxer briefs or something like that, underwear, or even compression shirts, then it will kind of come down. But when you start to survey consumers, which we did, people don't want to pay more than 10% more than what they're already paying for like their, you know, favorite Nike, Under Armour type T-shirts. So that's kind of where there's like a mismatch in sort of the consumer expectation and the user experience you create and the price point that an actual technology today can deliver. So
well, we're gonna have to leave it at that. Thank you so much to Raj, Crystal, and Al. I think that you were a phenomenal panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, Owen.
This.